Hello and welcome to Roundtable. The United Nations recently declared that the population of the world has passed 8 billion people. But the European Union isn't adding to that number. In fact, as a bloc, the countries of the EU have recently seen an overall fall in their population. Well, the full story is very complex because some European nations, they're growing, others are shrinking. What is behind these changes? It's good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Since 2020, France has seen the biggest increase to its population in Europe. Italy has suffered the biggest fall. Well, the exact reasons that two big countries such as this are heading in the opposite directions are many and varied. The latest data shows that the EU population fell from 447.3 million at the beginning of 2020 to 446.8 million at the beginning of 2022. While on a more basic level, more people died than were replaced either through birth or immigration. COVID, well, it is partly to blame, but with such a varying picture across the continent, what other factors are at play and what are the long-term consequences? Well, we have only 3 of the 8 billion plus people on our planet, but I'm delighted to say we can welcome in Oxford David Coleman, Emeritus Professor of Demography at Oxford University. To Milan, Francesco Billari is there, Professor of Demography in the Department of Social and Political Sciences at Bocconi University. And to Vienna, Austria, and we say hello again to Sergei Scherbov, Director of Demographic Analysis at the Wittgenstein Center for Demography and Global Human Capital. Demographic here, demographic there, all of you experts in population movements, growth, etc., etc. But, David, to many it might seem like a particularly dry subject. Obviously, it doesn't to you. What makes what we're looking at here so interesting?
Well, in general, it can't be dry if it's to do with sex, reproduction and death, population growth and decline, large-scale migration, extinction and all the rest. There's lots of excitement in demography. At the moment, of course, we have this slightly fake milestone of 8 billion people being passed, but we do have tremendous changes taking place in the world, with some countries for the very first time facing very interesting population decline with all the consequences that that's going to bring, while others are still racing ahead in terms of population growth and will keep on growing until the end of the century and beyond.
Are we seeing anything that we haven't seen before?
Well, we're seeing population totals we haven't seen before. We're seeing large numbers of countries with large numbers of people in them reaching a position where they have tipped over into population decline, with all that implies from the point of view of population aging and diminution of their status on the world stage, perhaps, but also I think something of a rescue from the problems of excessive growth, and an opportunity to make use of restrained fertility. Sergei and Francesco will, I think, probably both tell you that there are a number of studies which show that the ideal level of family size for human welfare is not replacement level, or around 2. It's about 1.7, 1.8. That's perhaps controversial, but it's increasingly widely believed.
Sergei, let me come to you, and I'm saving you for a moment, Francesco, because I want to talk to you specifically about Italy. But Sergei, let me come to you, and we're going to put up a graph here which shows the annual population growth rate in Europe from 1950 to 2021. It fell in Europe immediately after the Second World War, but then picked up. And then we saw it fall steadily from around about 1961 all the way up to the early part of this century. So what we're seeing now, when populations are getting smaller, or the population growth is getting smaller, it is nothing new. But what do you see in what we're seeing happen at the moment?
Population was increasing in Europe to a large extent due to migration, and because the fertility level is not high enough to sustain population growth. Moreover, what was shown that even if fertility level jumps to so-called replacement level, when cohort of girls replace cohort of mothers, even then population will still decline, because this is already built up in the age composition of European population. That's what we, for example, opposite what we have in China. In China, a long time ago, I think from the beginning of 2000, maybe much earlier, fertility rate is below replacement level, and population is still growing because it was built in the population pyramid, so-called population momentum.
Francesco, let me ask you about this. Well, put this on screen first. Population growth was recorded in 17 EU countries, so growth, it went up there, declined in 10. The largest fall in population, Italy, which lost over 250,000 people. This is in the 12 months up to January of this year. The largest increase in France, around 186,000. Why 250,000 in decline in Italy, your country?
Basically, it's a combination of two factors. First is the long-standing decline in fertility, which has brought Italy with Spain to be the lowest fertility in the world in terms of ranking countries during the 90s. Fertility is no longer the lowest in the world in Italy. Korea has the lowest fertility, but it's still closest to one child per couple.
Oh, so when you say fertility, you're not talking about the ability to reproduce, you are talking about reproduction, the rate of reproduction. Okay.
Exactly. I'm talking about the actual choices under constraint that couples do. So it's not necessarily the ability, but the actual behavior. So this is the first factor. The second factor was that for a while, Italian population growth was sustained by strong immigration. And so Italy reached the peak population over 60 million some years ago, basically about 10 years ago, close to 10 years ago. And since then, fertility has kept declining, and also immigration has declined. So we are in the current situation of population decline.
What does it mean to see a population decline such as this? What effects does it have on society? Can you give me any examples from Italy? And I'll come to you other two on that as well.
First of all, the situation at the national level masks wide heterogeneity within Italy. In particular, southern Italy and rural areas in Italy are declining much faster. Population decline of this sort is linked to fast population aging. So in terms of demography, this is the most important implication of fast population decline.
So are you saying that in southern Italy, people are living longer?
Basically, the length of life is relatively similar across Italy. However, the share of older people over the population, or the share of older people over young people, is becoming higher in southern Italy and is already higher in rural Italy compared to cities.
Crikey. David Coleman, what does that tell us about society as a whole? That we're getting better at keeping people alive longer, but that is not necessarily a good thing for society?
I think it's so important from the point of view of welfare that we shouldn't worry about the larger scale consequences. There are other ways of dealing with that. In fact, keeping people alive for longer and keeping them healthier for longer is absolutely crucial if we are going to manage population aging satisfactorily. Because given that population aging is a fact and is inevitable, it's essential that people enter old age in better and better states of health, partly for their own benefit, but also so they can continue to work longer. Because as lives are longer, then working lives must also be longer. Otherwise, pensions and elderly care will become completely unaffordable.
This is,
so
sorry to interrupt you. Just picking up on a thread of yours there. Yes, people are
Yeah.
able to work longer, but do they have to be told to work longer by their governments? Can countries manipulate their population's contributions monetarily to society? Because if you get a massive aging population and they don't pay any taxes, that's a burden.
Well, that's exactly the point I'm making. People have to work longer if they're living longer. Otherwise, they'll be impoverished. Manipulation sounds rather sinister and unpleasant, but governments do this already very reluctantly by edging up the age of entitlement to state pensions, which most countries are doing. A few try to buck the trend for reasons of electoral popularity, as in France, for example, and elsewhere. But soon they're forced off that unsustainable course and have to join the rest of the club in putting up retirement ages.
Sergei, if you have an increase in your population, as we suggested, France did, around about 180,000 throughout the course of last year. Can you avoid, as David is suggesting, telling people that they have to work longer? Because if you've got an increase of 180,000, doesn't sound very much, but if you've got that increase, then you've got more people perhaps paying taxes, and therefore you can afford to retire earlier.
Well, I don't think that any European country can afford to retire earlier these days, because you see, aging is to a certain extent artificial measure, because we introduce who is old, and we just say, okay, someone is at age 60 is old, or at age 65 is old. But that's not right. So people are living longer, and we should consider people old at older ages, and then it is necessary to increase the retirement age. And if we consider that old age threshold is not something fixed, then in fact what we did a lot of estimation, a lot of calculations in this area. Then basically there would be almost no aging happening, even in European countries, because people can work, people are healthier, becoming healthier, they live longer, they become healthier, human capital is increasing, people are more educated, so people can stay longer on the labor market.
What about this? I'm coming to you, Francesco, from Pope Francis, who's talking about couples who decide not to have children, might want to have a cat or a dog instead. He says, today we see a form of selfishness. We see that some people do not want to have a child. Sometimes they have one and that is it, but they have dogs and cats that take the place of children. This may make people laugh, but it is a reality. His suggestion there is that people are being selfish to the whole of the rest of the human race. Does he have a point?
To be frank, I believe strongly in the free right to have the number of children we want and when we want to have them. Normally, when we ask to people in surveys, on average, they will want to have in Europe around 2 children. So I don't think the raising share of childless individuals, those who choose to be childless and those who happen to end their reproductive life as childless, is necessarily the key issue. And I don't think we can force people to have children. Basically, having children is a lifelong choice. We become parents, we will stay parents forever. This is not a one-shot choice, it's a life choice. And so we have to become parents in a responsible way.
Let me play this from someone who lives in Rome, a very new mother.
It is true, we are 8 billion, but in our country, Italy, there is zero growth. We complain that young people today are no longer able to build a family due to a series of problems. So I hope that as the years go by, my son will live in a society that is better than the one we have today.
Her point is that she hopes things will get better, but do you think, Francesco, some people are choosing not to have children because they see the state that the world is in and they don't like it?
Maybe yes. I have to get back to one of the points you made before, which is retirement age. So in Italy, we are also very known for very big public spending towards the elderly compared to very low public spending towards children and young people. Population aging has a very specific implication, which is the electorate is aging a lot. So every time we have to think about reforming retirement age, as we were discussing before, it is very hard for the government to be supportive for that. Actually, Italy, in some cases, even anticipated retirement ages. So I think one of the issues that young people face today is societies that are not necessarily too kind of friendly towards those who want to have children. And also there is also the fear of the future. But to be frank, the fear of the future has been there for a long time in human history.
Well, indeed, which was, of course, why we saw in centuries gone by, women would have 10, 12, 15 children because they knew the mortality rate was going to be so high. So they anticipated problems to come. David Coleman, what about people now anticipating the fact that they don't want their children to grow up in such a rotten world, and that's why they're not having children? What kind of impact would that have?
Well, first of all, there are lots of reasons why people are having fewer children than in the past, and fear of the future may be there, but it's only one factor. And there are lots of perfectly objective, sound economic reasons and social reasons why people are delaying having children and having fewer. The problems in Britain, the problems of access to housing and the cost of housing is, I think, very important. The current economic recession is extremely important, and naturally it would be highly irrational if people went on to have more children under present circumstances. But birth rates, is very important to remember, do go up as well as down, and have done so. The present birth rate in Britain, corresponding to just under 1.6 children, was seen back in 2001, and then it went up in a few years to 1.9. It was seen in the 1930s, and then went up to 2.4 after the 2.8 after the Second World War. So it doesn't do to be too pessimistic just because current circumstances are very obviously unfavorable. Having said that, I do agree that there is now much more consciousness than there used to be about worries of global climate change and the future of the world and the exhaustion of natural resources. People are better informed about that, so it'd be rash to say that wasn't important. I just don't know how important it is, but I think in the past, as Francesco was saying, such concerns have always to some extent been with us about one thing and another, and doom has not yet arrived.
What about the economic consequences? Sergei, I'll come to you on this one. Somebody talking about the British baby shortage. And this is Dr. Avik Bhattacharya, Chief Economist at the Social Market Foundation. The question of whether the government should intervene to try to increase the birth rate is clearly a sensitive topic that must be delicately handled. However, given the alarming fall in fertility rates and the risks that population aging poses to our social and economic well-being, it is a discussion we should not duck. We've talked about retirement. What other consequences cannot be avoided? What must be done if economic consequences aren't to be disastrous?
Well, first of all, I fully agree with what Francesco said, that, I mean, women should have as many children as they want. There should be no pressure in this sense. On the other hand, of course, government policy can be developed in such a way that women may have at least the number of children that they want to have, and not less. And in this sense, you know, this part-time work or daycare for children, that's important thing that government can do. And I think that's where Sweden and Scandinavian countries were very good. And that's why, partly because of that, they had more or less high fertility level compared to many other European countries. And the second thing, you know, related to aging, of course, it's education and health. It's human capital, because that's the way how we can deal with declining labor force. Again, we come to the same issue of extending age at retirement, and we can only extend it at age at retirement if people live longer and people are healthier. And then at least half of the time of this extended life could go for leisure, and time could go again that people can continue working.
I read about problems with birth rate in Latvia and other Baltic states. Have you read much about that?
No.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Perhaps one would say that the situation of the states which were formerly part of the Soviet Union is rather a special one. They've had a rather dismal history and a very uneven history that until 1991, families were heavily subsidized, unemployment was unknown, wages weren't high, you know, that we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us, they used to say, but nonetheless things were constant. The end of the Soviet Union upset all those apple carts, and there's been a very uneven, unstable history since then, which hasn't really settled down yet, combined with what may perhaps have been a premature admission to the European Union, which in some parts of Eastern Europe has promoted a tremendous outflow of population, which may have benefited the countries in which those migrants have gone, but certainly hasn't benefited those countries from which they left. So many areas are too much depopulated. So it's rather an unstable area. I'm not surprised that birth rates have remained low, but they are recovering now that the shock of the lack of old state subsidies has gone. There's new forms of state support and a new economic growth. So I'm not too dismayed about the Eastern European countries. They have shown until recently anyway quite a substantial recovery in the birth rate.
Interesting. Francesco, you were going to come in, but I want to ask you something that's a little bit off the wall. We've talked about many reasons why birth rates may be falling. We've talked about some reasons why in some places it is increasing. I'm wondering about something that I might like to label the happiness index. If people in a country feel relaxed, do they want to have more children or fewer children so that they can spend more time enjoying themselves, so to speak?
Oh, that's a very nice way of putting this. A while ago, a couple of us worked on this topic. And let's get back to the issue of having children versus becoming a parent. Basically now, in contemporary societies, we become parents when we tend to be happier. So happiness is a prerequisite for having children, also because of some of the factors you brought in earlier. So we want our kids to grow up in a good society. So happiness is a prerequisite. It's not by chance that within Europe, societies in which economic situation is better, happiness tends to be higher, and also fertility is higher.
Sergei, let me throw this one at you. You can comment on the happiness index if you like, but casting ahead another 30 or 40 years, can you give any educated guesses about where Europe's population will be? Because I was doing a program the other day simply about the 8 billion, and I was told that it would level off. What's going to happen in Europe? It's falling at the moment. What's going to change?
Well, it tremendously depends upon the policies. You see, we would never expect that number of migrants coming to Europe, say, several years ago. Like migration is something that can be controlled by governments, although sometimes it doesn't really it's not that well controlled, but still this is something that governments can control. And I would think that probably migration will play the crucial role in the population growth, because if we look now at all the European countries, then basically there is not a single country where total fertility rates exceeds simple replacement level. And in the long run, if even as I said earlier, that even if countries reach replacement level, in the long run, the population of Europe will be declining simply because it's already built in age composition of Europe.
And are we going to see, therefore, those countries that are less attractive to people, in other words, those from which people want to move, to migrate from, losing their population at a faster rate in countries perhaps such as Italy, which are deemed attractive to migrants. And I've just done a programme on that, which accepted last year something in the order of 180,000 migrants, Ukraine and African. Are we going to see populations in Italy perhaps going back up and those in countries that are less attractive falling because people are leaving? Quick one, if you don't mind. Francesco, I'll throw that one to you.
Okay, no, let's say I think population increase will be there in countries that will be economically and socially successful. So a prerequisite for successful population change in terms of either very slow decline or slow increase is having a good economic outcome.
Okay.
By the way,
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you
Italy-
because I'm going to just summarize that. Follow the money and you'll find the people. Thank you very much indeed. Time runs out on us. Thank you very much indeed for taking part in this conversation. And thank you wherever you are for watching what we've put out on this round table. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the team. Until next time. Goodbye.